Right, everybody, I'm just going to say a huge welcome to our Stronger Practice Hub event today. I have the amazing honour of introducing Professor Sam Waz, who is a child psychologist and neuroscientist whose research explores how children's attention, learning and regulation develop through relationships with the adults around them. And for anybody who's attended any of our Stronger Practice Hub events before knows how importantly we think about relationships. He's the director of the Institute for the Science of Early Years and a leading voice in translating developmental science into practice. So Sam, I cannot wait to hear what you have to say today. So I'm going to mute myself and hand over to you. I'll keep my eye on the chat. Sam, if you're happy for me to just interject if there's anything prevalent in there that comes up, is that all right?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Other than that,
that's great. Looking forward to it. And then Fliss will do. So because I've really set this up very much as a conversation, because you said you because the chance to have quite a nice chat afterwards. So I'll talk, but then we'll have quite a lot of time for people to talk afterwards. Yeah. So I'll probably aim to talk for round about an hour, maybe even a bit less than that, slightly less than that, and then we'll have a good half an hour for chat if people want to. Yeah,
that would be fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So people in the audience, make your notes and think about what you would like to ask Sam.
Great.
You.
Okay, yeah, really nice to be here, and then looking forward to talking to people. Just to warn you, and I told Fliss I was going to blame her for this before, so this is actually a talk that I haven't done much for practitioners before, so I've kind of taken this very much from the talk that I do for researchers. I'm trying to emphasize the kind of relevance for practice. Obviously, I think it is very, very relevant for practice all the way through. But there are quite a lot of graphs in there, and blame Fliss for this because she egged me on when we had our briefing call, and she said, "Oh, I love a bit of graphs, and I love getting geeky." But what the other thing that I've been really keen looking forward to doing this very much as a conversation, because a lot of this research we're looking at kind of adult-child interactions in the context of kind of shared kind of emotional states, which we're going to be talking about today, and then shared attention states, which we're going to be talking about next week. I'm really interested in having a conversation about how a lot of this stuff has been done with parents, and then looking about how we can take some of these and apply them in the context of early years practice. So really interested in having that as a conversation, because a lot of the other practitioner stuff is kind of quite different from this, but this is obviously very, very, very relevant to your days. Okay, so just as Fliss mentioned, so I'm a kind of academic researcher who I do a lot of stuff for early years practitioners, but this is very much the story of this one starts very much from our academic research. So basically we just had this 5-year grant from the European Research Council, which basically funds these kind of high risk, high reward projects. And basically the pitch that I put in was basically we do a lot of stuff about developing brains. Yeah, so how brains learn to process information. Okay, and basically the pitch that I wrote for them 5 years ago was pretty much everything we know about the developing brain comes from this type of paradigm on the left. Yeah, we put a child and we measure their brain activity and we flash up a lot of stuff on a computer screen, yeah, or on a auditory kind of playing them over speakers, and we look at how their brains process information that way. Yeah, and we do this for practical reasons. It's very easy to show the same stuff to lots of different kids in exactly the same way, so we can look at how their brains kind of respond differently to the same stuff that we're getting them. Yeah, but at the same time, this way of thinking about how brains learn, yeah, has this really, really important limitation, which is that we know that we spend almost all of our waking hours during early life in the company of adult carers, and we know that from lots and lots of different ways that social influences are massively important in early learning. Yeah, so many different ways. You'll notice this minute by minute, second by second. All you have to do is pay attention to something, and then the children in your setting are immediately interested in that thing that you're paying attention to. Yeah, as well as this idea, this direct idea of how we're going to be talking about how this kind of process of kind of sharing attention changes how children kind of of pay attention to things around them. Yeah. So that if you're interested in something, they're interested in it too. Yeah. As well as if you're interested in what they're interested in, that changes how they pay attention. Yeah. So we know that these things are massive drivers of early learning, but we really understand very little about what this is happening in the brains. Yeah. So the pitch I gave for this high risk, high reward project was, instead of just measuring kids' brains while we're flashing stuff at them with a computer screen, we're going to do it something differently, which is we're going to just give adults and children, we've done this with parents and unfamiliar practitioners, put a pile of toys down on the table, measure both of their sets of brain activity at the same time, and to try to understand these types of kind of social influence. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. As I say, emphasizing as much as we can the relevance of this for policy and practice. We're also going to be talking a bit about some work that we've been doing since then. So we're based out in East London, in quite a deprived area in lots of ways, and we do a lot of work looking at early life stress, how that affects these early, the way in which kind of attention is shared, and we're also doing some work looking at kind of early life pathways to anxiety, autism, ADHD. We're looking kind of before diagnosis. So ADHD gets diagnosed on average age 6, autism on average age 4. But what we're doing is we're tracking these high risk children in early development to try to look at the early kind of causal pathways that lead to them later getting flagged up with the diagnosis. So to try and target early interventions, that type of stuff. So I'm going to be talking kind of a little bit about this. But basically everything that I'm going to be talking about today comes down, I guess, to this idea. I guess it's two ideas that you can talk about. So one is this idea of synchrony, which I know is a great interest to a kind of Pen Green and your Stronger Practice Hub. Fliss was saying about, you've had Colwyn Trevarthen on your advisory board for a long time. And this idea of kind of intersubjectivity, this idea of kind of shared emotion states and shared attention states and shared brain states. So we're going to be talking lots and lots and lots about kind of work that we've done looking at this idea of kind of synchrony and shared brain states. What is synchrony? Is it always good to be, in sync? Do you always want to be in sync? How do I be in sync when I'm caring for 5 babies at once? How am I in sync with 5 babies at once? Is there such a thing as too much synchrony? We're going to be talking about there's an idea of too much synchrony. There's an optimal mid-range of you're in sync enough, but you're not too in sync. So we're going to be really interrogating this question. I'm trying to get more in depth into this idea of what is this idea of interpersonal synchrony. But it all comes down to this idea, which is our relationships define us through early life. We are born, compared to any other species, we are born far, far more vulnerable, far, far more incapable. We are dependent on others for every single aspect of our function for a much longer period than any other species, for reasons that we understand quite well. We've got big brains, but we're bipedal, so we've got a narrow birth canal. So we're born at an earlier stage of our gestation relative to other animals than they are. And because of that, we need adults for everything. So it's part of this, but it's also a kind of an idea that is increasingly coming out from neuroscience, which is kind of emotions. We used to think of emotions as stuff that happens inside us. Back to this idea that we thought it was okay to study the brain by taking the brain into a controlled setting and flashing stuff up on a screen. We used to think of emotions as stuff that happens inside me and inside my body. And we're increasingly realizing that emotions aren't that. Emotions are something that exists between me and someone else. They exist in the space between me and another person. And we're increasingly thinking of attention in the same way. So attention isn't just something that happens in my brain. Attention is a relationship between me and an object, and it's a relationship between me and another person. So this is understanding this is particularly important during early life because we are so dependent on these social influences coming from other people. But it's also something like just about how our brains work. It's not just that I have an emotion in me. Emotion is something that exists in the space between me and someone else. Okay. So basically, as I say, I'm going to be kind of emphasizing the practitioner relevance. of some work, some like pure academic work that we've done. So this is a review that we did in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, looking at this idea of synchrony in early relationships. And this is a review that we've done following on from this, which is very much kind of focused on practitioners looking at the kind of practical influence of these things. So we're going to be talking about those and, exploring, as I say, the relevance for you in your practice. And it starts really from this poem, which is quoted there at the beginning of this thing. And that's where I got the title of the talk. They're the dances at the still point of the turning world. Okay, and I'll just read it to you because I really like it. These, by the way, are these Kathy Colvitts drawings of a mother and a child, and this poem this is a little bronze sculpture that she did of a mother and child that I just love. I've got a young baby at home, and it just gets my heart wet every time I just look at these pictures. The tenderness in them, it's beautiful. And this is a lovely poem too. So at the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement. Yeah, so neither stopping nor moving, and do not call it fixity where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. Yeah, so that is what we're going to be talking about today, this idea that shared emotions, and in the next talk, shared attention states, that these ideas happen like a dance, and it's a dance between you and the child, and we're going to be talking, as I say, the relevance of this idea for understanding what relevance for understanding emotions, kind of, and attention. And we're going to be talking very much about this dance around the still point of a turning world. How you move, and your moves are in a way the opposite of the moves that the child is making, and how through this, you keep the dance going, but it's a dance around a still point. This is the idea that I'm going to be talking to you about, kind of the underpinning neuroscience of what we've done, how it feeds into this idea, and the relevance of this idea for practice. Okay. And we're going to be talking in two parts. So if you think about this idea of a dance, what needs to be there for a dance to be a dance? And the first is this idea of rhythm. So we're going to be talking a lot about these idea of shared rhythms. If two people are just waving their hands in their air, it's not a dance. There needs to be an underlying beat that they're both waving their hands in the air too. So we're going to be talking about what is the underlying beat. Both in terms of how we feel emotions, how we experience emotions, talking about all of these different rhythms that are going inside you, and all of these different rhythms that are going inside a child, and what is the role of these shared rhythms, in creating this kind of movement around the still point of the turning world, But also, there needs to be more than rhythm for it to be a dance, If there's just a beat going on and people are dancing, they're dancing, but they're not dancing with each other. They're not doing this lovely thing that is being demonstrated by these people up here. And for a dance to be a dance, if I'm really dancing with this child that I'm interacting with, we need to have this underlying rhythm that I'm talking about, but we also need to have this other element, which is I'm changing what I do moment by moment, depending on what they're doing. And if you think about it, when you're dancing, and this is the bit that honestly I struggle at. I always feel I'm rubbish at actually dancing with people, because it's that idea of how do you learn to read their cues. Even with my wife, I just, that thing of either good at dancing together and then you do a lot of it, or we're just terrible at dancing with each other and I feel terrible. I always get all depressed and think, our relationship's doomed if we're this bad at dancing with each other. And it's this moment of, being responsive, working out what the cues are, trying to anticipate what the other person's doing. So this is this idea of doing it. Okay. So these are these two ideas that are common to everything that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to try and convince you that early mood regulation and early attention both operate like a dance, a dance around the still point of the turning world. Okay. So that's basically the aim for this and the next talk, But first of all, if we're thinking about a dance of mutual regulation, so if we've got this still point that we're kind of dancing around, what is the still point? Where am I trying to be? What am I? What we're talking about is this idea of basically something that we can measure, and we measure a lot, and it's something that is really, really crucial for understanding early years practice, which is this idea of kind of arousal. Yeah. So as adults, we basically got quite a simple kind of pattern. Yeah. We have one day-night cycle. Yeah. We're awake. We wake up. We have a big increase in the levels of activity. It's governed by a part of the brain down here, the brainstem down here. And basically, for the first, couple of hours after waking up, the levels of activity in the brainstem, which is then sending signals to my body, increase. Yeah. And then we're at a peak, and then gradually we decrease during the course of the day. And obviously then when we go to sleep, we're in a much lower state. Yeah. And then we wake up and we repeat the cycle. So we have one clean day-night cycle. By the way, this isn't real data. This is just a schematic, because it's really hard to get this data actually for babies. Yeah. Whereas for babies, we know that a young baby, will go through multiple shallow sleep-wake cycles, and they'll go through those cycles, and then they're smaller at night, but the difference is less, and then basically over the course of the first few years of life, we transition from these multiple shallow sleep-wake cycles to one big stable adult-like cycle. So we're going to be talking about that, but we're also going to be talking about this fine-grained moment by moment. So this is just some data from our thing, which is basically just how fast my heart rate is going. So this is some data from a 12-month-old. This 12-month-old was actually sat. We were doing some tests while we were measuring their heart rate. And basically, this 12-month-old, their heart starts at 120 beats per minute, and then basically by about 3 minutes into the test, their heart's up to 120 beats per minute is about typical for a 12-month-old. But then by about 3 minutes, and they're up to 180 beats per minute, which is really quite a big difference. And then they slow down again, and then they go up again, and then they go down. So we can study this, like how awake, how alert, how excited we are. We can study it at the daily cycle. And we can see that the children have, more big up and down cycles than we do as adults. But we can also zoom in to a really fine grained level. And there we also find this idea that our kind of arousal states are more unpredictable for a moment to the next. We still see this through all stages of childhood. Obviously it's something that varies a lot between different children as well. We're talking about that. Actually, I'm not sure I am going to talk about that, but I'm really happy to talk about the differences between individual children as well. But it's just a general pattern that all children, adults have this ability to get into a state and stay in that state. And children are more unreliable when they're in that state. They're more likely to transition out. Okay, so we've got unstable daily cycles, that are fast, and then transition to stable adult cycles. But we've also got this moment by moment variability. Where I am moment is less predictive of where I'm going to be at another moment. And we know that this dance of mutual regulation, happens a lot, around helping a child to be in the state that they want to be in. They're moving, they're transitioning, they're unstable, they're irregular. And basically one of the things that we know is really, really important is, if I've got a child who is, we call over aroused, I'm illustrating this with pictures of older children here, but you can, imagine what this looks like when we're thinking about young children. If I've got a child who's over aroused, I help them to come down. And if I've got a child who's under aroused, which looks a bit like this, I help them to come up. And there are various things that can bring us back from both extremes. So we're doing some research on being outdoors. So being outdoors takes you from hypo to optimal and hyper to optimal. So the same thing both calms us down if we're overexcited and excites us if we're underexcited. Similarly, physical contact. Obviously, this is one of the practical things that it's interesting to talk about. But certainly with young babies, and lots and lots of physical contact for most children will both bring them down when they're up and up when they're down. And then there are some things like reducing the level of stimulation in the room, turning it into a quiet room, that will always shift me down. If I'm overexcited, it'll help me to calm down. If I'm underexcited, it will send me to sleep. So there are some things that will always shift us one way, and there are some things that always shift us before. But that's one of the ways that we're thinking about kind of co-regulation. So how do I help a child to be in that zone, somewhere between drowsy, drifting off to sleep, and overexcited, bouncing off the walls. Yeah. How do I help a child to get into that zone where everybody does their best learning? Yeah. And how do I help them to stay in that zone, given that children tend to be there? Yeah. And this idea of a dance. Yeah. We're going to be talking about how do rhythms and responsiveness, these two ideas that I've introduced. Yeah. How do those two ideas help me to stay in that state that I want to be in? Yeah. But also, as I've been, and this is kind of something I've been thinking about more and more recently, that's a little bit too simple, because we do a lot of day-long recordings from children when they're in childcare settings. Yeah. And I put this up. This is the kind of adult pattern where we just have one cycle. Yeah. And we're used to thinking about that one cycle. But in fact, if you plot the cycle for a child, yeah, when they're in this kind of setting, then you see kind of a pattern that's more fine-grained during the course of the day. Yeah. So when I arrive, so imagine this line is basically how awake, how alert I am. Yeah. When I arrive, I'm quite awake, alert, particularly if I've had a stressful home environment, unpredictable interactions with my carers, that type of stuff. You'll very often have children arriving in your setting in quite a wired state. Yeah. And obviously the first move that happens is a down move. Yeah. But then, if I'm transitioning, depending on how you have your daily timetables, if I'm, a time of day when I know that there's outdoor play, yeah, I need to be in a higher arousal state. Yeah, my heart needs to be beating faster. And then lunchtime, and I'm sitting still, I need to be low, and so on and so on. Yeah. So it's not just the case that we have this one state that we want to be in all of the time. Yeah, this intermediate state, halfway between sitting, drowsing off, falling to sleep, and bouncing off the walls. Yeah, there are different states that I want to be in during the course of the day. Yeah, and we're going to be thinking about how we can help children to manage these transitions. Yeah, obviously. And again, as I say, I'm not talking a lot about individual differences, but this idea of managing these transitions is something that I was just helping. I don't know if you know Julian Grenier. He's the early years lead at the Education Endowment Foundation, and he's very interested in this idea of inclusive early years practice. And he was just writing something for the Times Educational Supplement on inclusive early years practice that I was. Why was he sending it to me? I don't know. I was helping him do it. And he was very interested in this idea that particularly some children struggle with these downwards transitions. Yeah. And if I'm in a high excitement state, yeah, and I can't get down to the point where I'm focusing and engaging on something, yeah, then that is a real barrier to my learning. Yeah, we know that when I can focus on something, yeah, when I'm engaged in something and interested in something, then my brain then sends a dampening mechanism down that helps me calm down even more. Yeah, so if I'm reading a book, then that if I'm interested in it, engaged in it, that calms my body down more. Yeah, but we have some children who can't get into a calm enough state where they can focus on a book to start with. Yeah, which is a real problem, because it's a real barrier, because then they can't have this I'm interested in something and I'm engaged in it, which calms me down even more. Yeah, so specifically this idea of down regulating attention states, going from this high arousal state into something that's calmer, is something that is worth talking about. Yeah, so it's not just one optimal state, we're moving between states. Okay. Right. And then I'm actually going to have to speed up a bit because I've been talking too much, because looking at the time. But basically, obviously, this is something that is really, really important in the context of attachment. Yeah. So firstly, obviously, one of the things that we know, which is crucial to all the classic theories of attachment, is if I'm in a state that I don't want to be in. Yeah. So if I'm excited, yeah, and I don't want to be excited, yeah, I learn to send a signal to my carer to elicit co-regulation, to say I need help right here. Yeah, so this is a really, really core theory of attachment. Yeah, but there are also other ways in which so we've done some work looking at things like that, but also how you over communicate signals. Yeah, so we've done some work about children who, even when they're not very aroused, will be sending big signals out. Yeah, so what guides this? Sorry, Fliss, someone's come off mute again, because I can hear some shuffling. Do you mind just having a look? Sorry. So what guides this over communicating? Yeah, where I'm communicating more than I feel. Yeah, and how does that relate to attachment? Yeah, and then there's other things that are important for attachment, like exploration. Yeah, so there's some slides for some lovely models about how your attachment determines not just how you communicate at a given level. Do I ask for help when I need help? Yeah, but also, how does the presence of a person influence whether I'm likely to go off and explore in the first place? Yeah. So this is some lovely modeling, and I've got a project in Amsterdam at the moment, which is doing some lovely work looking at this idea of exploration. Yeah. If I have that secure base, I'm more likely to go further away from that base as well as come back towards it. Okay. So we're talking about arousal. Yeah. We're talking about this state of how awake, how alert we are. Yeah. And we're talking about this mainly from the point of view of, if I'm over aroused, I need help to calm down. If I'm under aroused, I need help to get excited. Yeah. How we want to be in this state. Yeah. But we're also talking about this more nuanced way that I move between states during the day. Yeah. And we're going to be talking about how our interactions with adults help us with these processes. Yeah. How do I make these strong, stable, reliable, consistent transitions that I need to be doing my kind of learning and interpersonal interactions? Okay. Right. Okay. So, yeah, first of all, we're going to be talking about rhythms. Yeah. So what kind of rhythms, how do our rhythms influence one another, and how are child's rhythms different to adult rhythms? Yeah. So I was thinking about this. I remember sitting there and I was doing, like, occasionally I get asked to do these Q&As where, it's like an Ask the Expert, and these parents come up and ask me questions. And there was one that I vividly remember. It was at a very noisy nursery in London. And there was this 50-month-old in a playpen, and he looked like a lovely kid. And he was kind of bouncing up and down. I vividly remember his face as he was sitting there bouncing up and down, looking at me in this playpen. And then his mum was sitting there. She'd been queuing up for ages to ask me questions. And she gestured at him and said, "Look at him." Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, well, he looks quite pleased, happy to be alive." And she said, No, but he's bouncing. How do I stop him bouncing all the time? And she was really obsessed by this idea that, she was still, and one of her really important jobs as a parent was to teach this 50-month-old boy who was in a noisy, busy setting to be as still as she was. Yeah. And that was a really, really big parenting goal for her. Yeah. And I kind of opened and closed my mouth and thought, well, there's quite a lot I could say in response to this question. I don't know how long I want an answer with the thing, but I guess, the answer that I would have kind of given her with the benefit of hindsight, I probably gave quite a bad answer in the moment. Was the benefit was that as adults, we put a lot of pressure on this idea of stillness. Yeah. And if you look at the PSED outcomes for the EYFS statutory framework, yeah, there's a lot of emphasis on this idea of being calm, yeah, being still, yeah, and you actually say, you actually tell yourself to, be calm, be flat, yeah, be still, yeah, and you certainly tell children, to be calm, be flat, be still, yeah, but this idea of stillness is an illusion, yeah, at any level. The idea of stillness is illusion. Yeah, you may think you're sitting still as you're listening to me talk, but you have this symphony of rhythms going within you. Yeah, from your brain is oscillating at about 7 cycles per second as I'm talking, through to your heart rate, your breathing. You have these fluctuations in your blood pressure once every 10 seconds called the Meyer wave. You get hungry every few hours. You get sleepy as adults once every 24 hours. We have seasonal cycles, and then there are lots of other multi-year cycles that are quite interesting that I'm not going to talk about now. Yeah. So we're constantly in movement. Yeah. And as biological organisms, we're never still. Yeah. The only time that we're properly still are when we're dead. Yeah. And that's the only time that we're actually still as biological organisms. Yeah. So we place a lot of emphasis. Yeah. We reward children for being still. Yeah. But this idea of forcing them to be still is an illusion. Yeah. As biological organisms, the way that we achieve stability is through this idea of constant even movement. So we're going to be talking about, how you create rhythms and how this influences children's arousal. But just to start with, why is this necessary? Yeah. Why are we thinking about this idea of co-regulating, trying to change the children's rhythms to help them to be stable. Yeah, because of what I said earlier, children's rhythms are messier. Yeah, both in terms of their, we have this really strong, stable 24-hour cycle. They have these, fast fluctuating cycles when they're very young that transition through the first 3 years to one a day. Yeah. But also, if you look at this fine grained scale, minute by minute, second by second, we have these kind of much, much bigger ups and downs. OK, so one of the things that we know is important, is we do this through creating we create rhythms for children in lots and lots of different ways. One thing that obviously is a really big part of any kind of practice, particularly kind of young practice, is how we create the sleepy time, during a nursery. Another thing that we can do is, have this idea of kind of timetabled activities. So we know that there's this process. So I do a lot of work at the moment with Book Trust, and we've been talking about this idea a lot. And they actually want to do some research into this, because it's very well understood, this idea that a book at bedtime is effective because the child learns to treat that as a signal that sleep is about to come in, 10, 20 minutes. And when they see the signal that sleep is about to come in 10, 20 minutes, their bodies can start to anticipate, and get them into that state that they need to be in anticipation of actually being there. It's a process we call allostasis. So I know that a change is about to happen, and my body can ready myself for that change in advance. And this is crucial for our kind of stress systems. The more I can prepare for a change between states, because I know it's coming in advance, the easier I make that transition. So it's the same type of idea, I'm sure, around preparing for sleep at nurseries. But there's much, much more to this idea. So when we do these day-long recordings of a child in a setting, for example, we did this in children in reception, and we looked at just their heart rate, and we found that in the 15 to 20 minutes before kind of lunch break, which for them in reception was a very physical time, after they'd, firstly they were in a very noisy hall, and then they were running around in the playground, so that's their heart rate spikes during the day. In the 20 minutes or so of lessons before, we can see their heart rate start to climb up. And it's the same idea that I learn to recognize a rhythm. And I start to prepare for what I know is happening in advance before it comes. And this is one of the things that is a crucial driver of, emotion regulation. If I get myself into the state before I need to be in it, I'm just easier to accommodate that state when it happens. So when I picked my I remember thinking about this a lot when Rose, my daughter, who's 5 now, when she was at her nursery, and I used to pick her up, and at handover every day they'd say, and today we did finger painting, today we did this, today we did that, and every day it was a completely different list of things. And I never actually said it because I never thought it was a weird comment, but what I always wanted to say, the answer that I always had to bite back was, you shouldn't be telling that to me. You should be saying, today your 2-year-old did exactly the same things at exactly the same time as she did the day before. And this is something that I think about a lot in the context of nurseries, also in the context of individual differences between children. I remember talking about this to a head teacher of a primary school in quite a rough area of the Wirral. And she said she really felt for her children because they go home during the holidays, and they just get sat in a room with an iPad, and they have no structure. They've got no idea what's happening that day. They just have the iPad, and then mum and dad have got to come in. I've got to go out and do a job, and the child gets just plonked in a pram with the iPad in front of them. They get wheeled out. They've got no idea where they're going. They've got no idea how long they're going to be out. And then they just get wheeled back and then put back in their home with the iPad in front of them. Their days are basically flat like that. And she was saying with these children who she knew that this was what was happening in the holidays, and she said the most rewarding thing about her job was standing there watching these children come into the reception classroom at the end of the school holidays, and just this feel of joy and relaxation from going back into a setting where the same thing is happening at the same time each day. Yeah, because of this idea of stability through movement. Yeah, it's very hard to be stable if we've just got a flat pattern to tune into. Yeah, but if we've got these movements, yeah, we achieve stability through movement. Yeah, our internal rhythms can synchronize to these rhythms that we're creating. Yeah, that's basically the idea that we're talking about. Yeah, and just quickly before I go on, this is something else that we can do through signaling. Yeah, so even if I don't memorize that, you know, this happens at a particular time of the day, yeah, if I've got a visual signal, then that helps, you know, next we're going to be doing this. Yeah, and it's all about this idea of stability through movement. Okay. So this is one idea, yeah, and then there's another idea which is kind of basically the same idea but at a much more fine-grained time scale, yeah. So when we talk about rhythms next week, I'm doing a session on attention, and we're going to be talking a lot about brain rhythms, yeah, and we're going to be talking about brain rhythms in language, and why a lot of the content, as shown by this nice a mouse took a stroll through a deep dark wood, a fox saw the mouse and the mouse not good, has this very strong exaggerated rhythms. Yeah, similarly, we're going on a bear hunt, we're going to catch a big one, what a beautiful day, we're not scared, grass, long wavy grass, we can't go over it, we can't go over it, can't go under it, we can't go over it. It's also very strongly rhythmic. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about children's brains and rhythms when we're talking about attention. Yeah, but this idea of, now I want to talk about this idea which is related to this idea of kind of rhythms in music and rhythms in singing. Yeah, I got interested in this when I was listening to during the BBC during the Second World War. What was she called? Was she called Anne Driver? I think she might be called Anne Driver, but basically there was this radio broadcast that used to go out at 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings on the BBC during the Second World War, and this very plummy voiced British presenter, I think she was called Anne Driver, would sit there playing on the piano, and she'd say kind of, "Come on children, gather all together now, let's sing a song," and then they'd lead them in song about "We're not scared of the Nazis," those types of things. Yeah, and there's lots and lots of evidence of this idea that, you know, at times when we would be scared, you know, I've certainly done it, you know, walks in the woods with kids and you get a bit lost in the night setting, and, you know, woods are quite creepy things to be in at dark. Yeah, and your natural instinct is to sing a song. Yeah. Why does this have an effect? Yeah, why does, you know, singing have this effect of regulating us through intense emotions? Yeah, and it's basically for a very similar reason to what I was talking about at the daily scale. Yeah, so we know that just as, you know, our bodies synchronize to a daily routine. Yeah, so similarly, when we're doing music, which has got a beat, you know, once a second or twice a second, yeah, we know that our heartbeats synchronize to the music. Yeah, that's why we listen to fast-paced music when we're working out as adults, why we listen to slow-paced music when we're trying to go to sleep, and so on. Yeah, music affects our heart rate. Yeah, and I was saying here, and I put this graph about how children's heart rates are much more uneven. Yeah, so if I'm, you know, singing this bottom heart rate, the one that I showed you that starts at 120, goes up to 180, it's like bum 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 bum. Yeah, that's what the beat of their heartbeat would be like. Yeah, and music by definition has got an even beat. Yeah, so by definition the beat comes at a regular space. Yeah, and playing something or singing something or taking part in something that has an even beat, yeah, lets our heart rate synchronize to that even beat, and it helps our heart rate to be regular. Yeah, not to be faster or not to be slower, just to be more regular. Yeah, it's the same idea of stability through constant even movement. Yeah, this is also, when we're talking about the attention and things, we're also going to be talking about how this is a really good way. We're going to be talking lots about how I pay attention when I'm not too calm, not too excited. And if I can keep myself in this state, yeah, we can have movement embedded with interesting stuff to learn. Yeah, we're going to be talking about call and response sequences, embedding learning into these types of rhythms. Yeah, but for now, this idea that if I want to help kind of emotion regulation, yeah, I can be thinking at these fine-grained, these coarse-grained daily scales, yeah, and I can also be thinking, how can I build other types of rhythm like these kind of music and singing into my practice? Yeah, how can I be thinking about other types of predictability where I got the same type of evenness and consistency? Yeah, because it all comes down to this idea of stability through movement. Yeah, we're constantly transitioning from one state to another. Yeah, whether it's fine grained or coarse grained, and we're constantly transitioning. And by creating these rhythms, yeah, we let a child who's more irregular tune into the rhythms that we create. Okay. So just quickly before we go on, how am I doing for time? Yeah, I've got about 15 minutes left. That's okay. So just quickly before we go on, I'm going to be talking a bit in the next thing about atypical development. And this is something I was interested in, having a conversation with you guys about, because a lot of this work has been done with parents. And obviously, yeah. And obviously, this is something that we can think about in terms of how our own kind of mental health affects how we interact with children. Yeah. And I know that for you guys, this idea of looking after one another is a really, really important part of the practice. And that is very, very, very evidence-based, yeah, because we know that how we interact with children, how we feel affects our interactions with children in lots of different ways. I'm going to be talking a little bit about this now and a lot more about this in a couple of minutes. Okay. So I've talked about this idea that we don't need to be still. Yeah. This idea of teaching a child to be still is an illusion. Yeah. We need rhythms. Yeah. We need this symphony of rhythms, from these fine-grained second scale to these daily rhythms to weekly rhythms. Yeah. The more rhythms we have, the more we have to tune into, the easier it is to be stable, not still. Yeah. But then there's two different ways in which we know that, if I'm kind of atypical or experiencing mental health problems, then I can be kind of both too flat. Yeah. So adult carers with depression, yeah, they lose these daily cycles. Yeah. So you're sleepy during the day and wide awake at night. Yeah. So your big even rhythms go flat. Yeah. Similarly, you're less responsive to these fine-grained rhythms, things like, music and that type of stuff. We tend more to be flat. Yeah. So that's one way in which we can be atypical, but also we can be too up and down. Yeah. So other types of condition like bipolar, oppositional disorders and that type of stuff have two big rhythms. Yeah. So, another way of thinking about it is children coming into your setting might show either of these types of atypicalities, but I'm going to be talking more about that in a second. Okay. So that's a little bit about rhythm, yeah, how we create rhythm, and through that we create stability through constant even movement, yeah, and we are making rhythms for children to tune into. Yeah, so this is very much a kind of it's mostly one directional. Yeah, obviously, in some settings, I don't know in your nurseries, but in some settings you're adapting the rhythm. So if you see a child who's sleepy, then you're change something to do this. But it's mainly a one-way process. Yeah, you create a rhythm, the child tunes in. Yeah, you're stable, predictable. You create a stable, predictable rhythm, the child tunes in. Yeah. But now we're going to be talking about the other thing, which is responsiveness. Yeah, how you change what you're doing, how you change the state that you're in moment by moment, dependent on cues you're getting from the child. Yeah. So this is very much the other way of thinking about the flow of information within a dia, the flow of information within a dance. Yeah. Partly there's this external rhythm, partly I'm changing what I'm doing. Yeah. So what kind of responsiveness? How am I affected if someone I'm looking after gets upset? Yeah. And how does this change in me influence them back? Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about. And as I say, I'm really, really interested, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you about these two different kind of ideas about how you practically manage this when you're looking after multiple children at once in a setting. Okay, so I had in tons of graph with Fliss egging me on, but and then I had mercy on you, and I took out quite a lot of these graphs because I thought it was going to be too much. But basically, we've got a lot of data on this, looking at kind of little monitors. So we design these little monitors that are basically little stress monitors and little microphones and little cameras and position sensors and things like that that we put on children and adult carers, either in home settings, or we're doing a lot of work in nurseries at the moment, and we've done some work in reception classrooms, to help us to look at this idea. So it's crucial that we're recording not just from the child, but also from the adult that they're interacting with. So we look at this idea of how are adults influenced moment by moment by the children that they're looking after. Okay. And so there's two things that we're going to get to. Firstly, we're going to get to that. But actually before that, sorry, I just was watching TV with my wife last night, and I had an idea for something I wanted to talk about in this talk, but then I actually forgot to put it in this morning. So I'm just going to do a slide without a slide. Sorry, because I thought that this was important, but I forgot to put the slide in, which is one. Actually, I'll do this first, and then I'll come back to that idea. Okay, so this is something that I first got interested in when I was working on this. It's called a snoo. I don't know if any of you have come across it. It's this American product. So it retails for about £1,500. It's very, very expensive. And I got sent a free one and was trying out with my kids. And it's a very, very simple program. So basically what this happens is when in this case, the baby gets upset, so they go from being happy to being sad, and they have a peak in their own stress, so they just wake up when they're asleep, so their heart rate starts to increase rapidly when you wake up when you're asleep. All the snoo does, is it starts to shake them more energetically, and then as they're gradually calming down, it starts to calm down too, and it's a very, very simple, you could, write an equation to predict how you do it like that. And I thought, well, this is quite interesting. And I've thought about this a lot with my own children. And it definitely changes a lot. So I've got three, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-month-old. And obviously this idea of co-regulation, we're doing a lot still with a 7-month-old. And this idea, and I still do it very, very deliberately, this idea that when she goes up, I go up to match her, and then I gradually remove the stimulation when I'm there. We've also done a lot of studies looking at this in adults. This is parents looking after children, and we found several times. I haven't got the graphs to show you because I didn't want to over bombard you, but I've got lots and lots of graphs about this. That on average, when a child gets upset, you as the adult looking after them, you have a peak in your own stress to match the peak in the child's stress, and the more that your stress increases, I mean your heart rate and your movement patterns, the more your heart rate and your movement patterns increase, the quicker the child calms down. So we've shown that quite a bit. I mean, just an example from 4 a.m. this morning in my life, my 7-month-old was I don't know, she's got something wrong, her stomach or something like that, but she was up crying, and that you can't comfort a crying baby very well when you're lying in bed. But if you can do that point, which I thought, I'm going to take one for the team, and I did it, you pick her up and walk her around the room. So that's been shown, very evidence that you calm a baby more quickly by picking them up and walking them around than you do just by holding them. Okay. Similarly, this thing about call centers. So this is kind of a principle that we've shown and other people have shown in the context of helping babies to calm down. You're changing your state to match the state of the child, and then something about changing your state to match the state of the child helps the child to calm down. It's also been shown by other people. So this is about, holding versus crying babies. It's also been shown by lots of other people to this idea of you parrot their emotional expression back to them. So it's this idea that I'm changing my state to help you to match to help. Well, we'll get onto why it works in a second, but I'm changing my own state to match your state. I'm immediately doing it. And we think about this. So, it's same. Actually, this guy, Harvey Kopp, the same guy who did the snoo, has got this book which talks about this very explicitly. Big Little Feelings do a lot about this on Instagram. If I've got a toddler who's tantruming, it's very tempting. Just like, you might immediately think, if I've got a baby who's crying, the calmer I can stay, yeah, the more that's going to help the baby to calm down. But as I say, there's lots of evidence that it's the opposite of that. Yeah, when a baby has a peak in the stress, if I have a peak in my own stress to match, that helps the baby to calm down more quickly. Yeah. Similarly, when your kids are a bit older and they're tantruming, yeah, it's very tempting to think, okay, the calmer I stay and more logical and reasoned I stay with this toddler in my setting who's having a tantrum, the quicker that toddler is going to calm down. Yeah. So you explain to them very nicely and very reasonably, yeah, no, you can't, throw that block at your friend's head because this, yeah, or, in our home setting, you can't pour orange juice on the cat because this, yeah. And you're thinking, okay, I'm setting a great example here. I'm being very calm and reasonable, yeah. And you've probably all experienced this. That in fact that seems to have exactly the opposite effect of what you'd want on a tantruming toddler. Yeah, and Harvey Karp and Big Little Feelings and other people have this idea that a more effective way to calm a tantruming toddler is to match your state to theirs. Exactly the same idea I've just been talking about with babies. Yeah, I match my emotion. Yeah, you commentate on what they're saying. Yeah, you really want to do this. You're feeling really cross about this. You use their language back to them. Yeah, you match your face. You match your tone of voice. You parrot what they're saying to them. Yeah, you match your state to theirs, and then you distract them. Yeah. So it's exactly the same idea. And we also do it in call centers. This is reminding me to say about call centers. Yeah. And I'm interested in emotion dysregulation because we're quite an emotion dysregulated family, all of us. And that's what kind of got me interested in the topic. And put it this way, it's not unheard of for me to get. I'm very impatient too, and when I'm get through after 20 minutes on hold at a call centre, it's not unheard of that the first thing that the poor person at the other end of the line says is, "I can't believe I've had to wait for 20 minutes to get through to you." Yeah, and I notice them doing this in call centres too now. So they get trained as part of their training. This idea of, right, if they just say, well, I can appreciate that it must be very upsetting when this happens, yeah, they get trained now to sound a little bit cross as well. Yeah, I can imagine that must be really, really frustrating that you've had to wait 20 minutes. Anyway, what can I do to help? Yeah, and even though I know it's a manipulation because I think about it a lot, that still, helps me to calm down. Yeah, this idea that the person is taking the effort to shift their state to a state more like mine to help me to calm down. Okay. So it's this idea of kind of change me to change you. Yeah. And I think I'm actually just going to. One of the big ideas that I wanted to talk about. So as I say, all of this research that we're talking about matching emotional expressions and matching our own body state. Yeah. This is very much done from the point of view of adults looking after children at home. Yeah, we haven't actually run this with carers in settings. I've done a lot of, observing, watching carers in settings. Yeah, and I noticed that, for example, if I've got, if I'm looking after, babies in a setting and one of the babies in a setting starts crying. Yeah. What I've seen happen very often is, the adult will pick up that child, hold them on their hip, do a lot of kind of, jiggling them up and down. Yeah. Creating rhythm similar to what I was just talking about. This kind of jiggling rhythm is smoothing for children. Yeah. But they won't be focusing their attention on that child there because they've got other children to be looking after as well. So their eyes and their mind will be on these other children while they're doing that. Yeah. And I often want to say this, that child probably would calm down more quickly. Yeah. I can't give you data on that. I've got lots of home data, but I haven't got data in settings. But my prediction would be if you do something different. Yeah. If you actually kind of fully focus on that child and change your state to match the state that child's in. Yeah. And then to help them to get out of it from there, as opposed to this, kind of half attention thing. Yeah. But obviously, the difficulty is you've only got one state. Yeah. If you're looking after multiple children in your setting, you've only got one state. Yeah. And you're looking after lots of different children. Yeah. Who are all in different states. Yeah. So how do you get yourself into all of these different states at the same time? Yeah. So that's something I'm hoping we can talk about in the discussion. Okay. I've just got a couple more things to say. I said I'm going to finish in 5 minutes. So I've just got a couple more things to say. Okay. And then we'll come back to the practical discussion. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how do these things develop atypically, yeah? And secondly, we're going to be talking about why does this help, yeah? Why does this process of matching your state to a child, what is it about that helps them to calm down more quickly? Okay. But first of all, how can this be atypical? Okay. So firstly, we can be not responsive enough, yeah? So basically, this can be a kind of a reaction. As I said, if we're in a depressed state, yeah, I'm naturally less responsive to people. Yeah, if a child is getting upset, I naturally, have this empathic response less. Yeah, not because you're a horrible person, but because of how the brain changes. Yeah, when we're depressed and anxious. Yeah. When we're depressed and anxious, we find it harder to do this process of remodeling our brain to understand, into the brain state of the person with whom we're empathizing with, yeah, to understand what this feels like from the child's point of view. Yeah, when we're depressed and anxious, we're more likely to interpret things as this is how it affects me that you're getting upset. Yeah, we're less likely to think, okay, this is how it feels from your point of view to be getting upset. Yeah, and as a result of that, there's lots and lots of evidence that in lots and lots of different ways, yeah, depressed carers do this process of matching their state to a child less. Yeah, and this can lead to kind of various different kind of chain reactions. Okay, so that's one way in which we can think about it. Yeah, we can think about these kind of I'm less responsive because I find it harder to match my own state to yours. Okay, but then there's another area where it could also go wrong. Yeah, so that's this idea of kind of insufficient synchrony. Yeah, but there's another way in which it can also go wrong, which is this idea of kind of excessive synchrony. Yeah. So we get this a lot, in my family. As I say, we're all quite wired. Yeah. And, it will very often be the case that I've got this thing that I got from my parents, which is before we go away on holiday, I haven't earned a holiday unless I pulled an all-nighter the night before catching up on all the work that I'm not going to get a chance to do when I'm on holiday. It's a kind of pure Protestant work ethic thing. So every single time we're piled into the car about to go on holiday, I'm on very little sleep and in an absolutely furious mood. Yeah. And so what will happen is the kids will often pick up on my mood in the back seat rather than sharing nicely. My son will just reach over and snatch a toy off his sister because they're picking up on my mood, which makes them more oppositional. Yeah. And I will react differently rather than, saying what would be a more effective way to get that toy off your sister. I will turn around and say, will you stop fighting? I'm trying to drive, like that, which being shouted at increases their stress still further. Yeah. So you get these chain reactions where you basically wind each other up in families. Yeah. You get this same idea in tantruming children, kind of externalizing conditions, obviously to a lesser degree. But if you're doing things like physical restraint on a tantruming toddler, then physical restraint, being physically restrained, increases your stress still further. Yeah. So you get a chain reaction. I'm stressed, or I'm oppositional. I'm breaking stuff, so I'm getting restrained, which makes me more stressed, and you get this type of a chain reaction. Yeah. And obviously, when it's slightly different in the context of carers in a setting compared to parents at home. Yeah. But is this idea that, if I'm, a child is getting dysregulated, I can react in a way that is matching my own state to theirs too much. Yeah. And it's actually making the problem worse, not better. Yeah. A child dysregulated, I'm getting stressed and I'm shouting at them, which makes them more stressed. Yeah. So it's this idea that, I can, if I do the wrong thing, I can make a problem better, not worse. Yeah. And, how do we do this? So I was talking about this with a friend who's an older teacher. An older teacher. He teaches older children. Yeah. And I was talking about this idea that, actually synchrony, we think there's an optimal mid-range of synchrony. We think it's this controlled, I've got a child who's upset. I can match my state to theirs in this controlled way. Yeah. But it's not too much. It's not too strong, because that can make them worse. Yeah. I can get into these chain reactions, and I'm not under responsive. Yeah. So I'm not matching my state. And he said, well, that's interesting, because I think he was the head of English at his secondary school. And he said he manages a lot of different people in his staff. Yeah. And he says he really notices a pattern in how well they can cope with teenagers getting upset. Yeah. Which is somewhere around the middle of their career, they can do this controlled process of matching my state to yours to show that I understand you. Yeah. So round about mid-career, they're best at helping teenagers in their settings from calming down when they're upset. Yeah. Early on in their career, yeah, when they've got a child who's getting upset in their setting, they will tend to get upset too, because they'll get panicky, they don't know what to do, which can then make the problem worse, not better. Yeah. And later in their career, when they've heard it all a million times before, they find it hard to care at all, to match their state to the child who's getting upset at all. And that also means that they're not so good at helping the child to calm down. So I just thought it'd be interesting, something we can discuss later, this idea that there's an optimal mid-range of synchrony, an optimal mid-range of matching your state to a child, yeah, that can happen at time. But certainly when we look in the context of people with mental health conditions, then we definitely get this, things like depression, insufficient matching, and other types of kind of atypicality can be excessive matching, yeah, where you go into these chain reactions. Okay. Last thing I'm going to say before I stop, I'm going to be a couple of minutes over, but I'm sorry. The last thing I'm going to say is this idea about why does it help? Yeah, this process of matching my state to yours. Why does it help? Yeah, and why does it help in a why does it help? Yeah. And I get asked this a lot when I'm presenting this type of stuff to practitioners. Yeah. I get asked, I remember someone coming up to me and saying, I've got a 50-month-old in my setting who can only calm down if I'm, co-regulating them. Yeah. Is this okay, Sam? Am I should I be doing it by co-regulating this 50-month-old? Yeah. Am I denying them the opportunity to learn how to self-regulate for themselves? Yeah. Should I be leaving children on their own to tough it out so that they learn self-regulation? Yeah. And I said, as I always say when anyone asks with that, in fact, the empirical evidence is exactly the opposite of that. Yeah. More caregiver involvement in co-regulation associates with better subsequent self-regulation. Yeah. Actually, just to qualify that has been shown a lot of times with adults. Adult carers in homes. I can't immediately think of something that's shown that with practitioners. This has definitely been shown a lot with adults. So the more involved a parent is in helping a child to manage their ups and downs during early life, the better that child is at managing their own emotional ups and downs during later life. Yeah. So why is it? Last question I'm going to talk about is why is this? Okay. And I think there's lots of different ways of answering this question. Yeah. One is this idea that I mentioned in the past, which is it has to be something which is controlled. Yeah. So it has to be this process of, I'm parroting, just as you see here, I'm parroting your emotion back to you. Yeah. In this very controlled kind of way. Yeah. I'm choosing to get up and walk you around the room, and have a lot of eye contact with you to match my states to yours to help you to calm down effectively. Yeah. And one of the things that we think is important is it helps the child to gain self-awareness about the state that they're in. Yeah. One of my big things in terms of ways that we should be changing education practice is this idea of children aren't born understanding what their own emotions are, and they aren't necessarily born with word labels to describe what their emotions are. Yeah. And there's really good evidence for things like mindfulness, which is something we do with older adults. Yeah. Mindfulness is pretty much our only proven talk therapy that's effective for mild to moderate anxiety and depression. Yeah. And it's weird because it's all about not trying to control the emotion. Yeah. All it is you definitely don't try and cancel emotions out. Yeah. We definitely have good evidence that you can't cancel an emotion. Yeah. I can't. This is something I always tell, but I'm still always telling my wife, don't be worried about something. And it's just like it's just not the way our minds work. Yeah. Or don't be upset about something. It's just not the way our minds work. Yeah. We can't cancel emotions. Yeah. It's very, very well evidenced. But mindfulness is proven to be effective as a way of coping with adult anxiety and depression in adults. And that's all about this process of just talking about it, discussing it. Yeah. And then that's it. Yeah. And something about this process of discussing an emotion, analyzing it, helps us to kind of reduce it over time. Yeah. And there's some really nice kind of brain studies looking at this, suggesting that this process of discussing and analyzing an emotion physically spreads out that emotion in the brain. Yeah. From the emotion centers that happen right on top of the brainstem, areas kind of the subcortex. Yeah. And it spreads out the coding of that emotion into the the kind of language part of the brain, the analysis part of the brain. And something about this idea of spreading out the emotion means that it's more governable. Yeah, it's easier for us to get hold of it and kind of get rid of that emotion when we want to. Yeah. So this process of interpersonal thing, yeah, that I reliably learn that when I do something, yeah, it gets a response, yeah, and I get this kind of mirror shown to me, yeah, someone is matching their state to mine, helps me, the first step, we think, in helping me to understand what this emotion is that I'm feeling in the first place. What does it look like, yeah, and this process of matching. Okay, so just really quickly, yeah, this idea of letting a child know how they feel, name the feeling for them if appropriate, get down to the child's level, possibly make eye contact, connect before you correct. That's what I've been saying. This idea of validating, letting them, you know that you understand this, feel this way. It's not the same as condoning. And then helping them to relax, warm, friendly tone of voice, calm presence, physical touch, slow, deep breathing, yeah, rhythm and rocking music, sensory activities, outdoor time, and then address behavior issues after the child's calm, yeah. This can take what happens, yeah, separate the behavior from the child, etc., etc. Yeah. So to map this onto what I mentioned, this idea of attune and validate happens during this moment where you're matching your state to theirs, yeah, and then you're leading them, having got this matching, you can then lead them, you first relax, which helps them to calm down, and then it's only when you're both flat that you address what caused the issue in the first place. Okay, so I'm a bit over, but hopefully we'll still have time for a bit of discussion. Yeah, just to say what I've said. Yeah, so we've been talking about arousal. Yeah, and we've been talking about how optimal arousal states are fluid. Yeah, and how we achieve stability through movement, a dance around the still point of the turning world. Yeah, we've been talking about how all of these processes are relational. Yeah, there's no such thing as a baby. You were describing a baby and someone. Yeah, relationships define us throughout our lives, but particularly during early life. Yeah. And then we've been talking about how these two relational processes, yeah, rhythm, how we construct rhythm, yeah, through these sub-second, songs and call and response, and sub-second kind of patterns, regular patterns that we create through speech and music, yeah, and through these daily routines, yeah, and by creating these strong, stable, regular rhythms. Yeah, we give them something to tune into. We give their bodies, which anyway are transitioning from one state to another, we give them a strong pattern. Yeah, so they know where to be next. Yeah, so they can make these changes in response. So they can learn to anticipate. Yeah, and anticipation is the first step towards self-control. Yeah, and then we've also been talking about how another way that we can think about this dance is about this idea of responsiveness. Yeah, which is all about being unstructured and being irregular. Yeah, how I'm continually adapting my state, just as in a dance, I'm adapting my steps depending on what my partner's doing. Yeah, I'm adapting what I say dependent on someone else. Yeah, and we think this is probably beneficial because it helps a child to gain self-awareness. Yeah, it helps a child to, gain self-understanding about the state they're in, which over long time frames helps through processes I can talk about more if you're interested in. And then we've been talking about different ways in which it can go wrong. Yeah, how we've been talking about synchrony. Yeah, is a good thing up to a point. Yeah, you can have excessive synchrony. You can have this idea of stress contagion. Yeah, the child gets upset and that sets off chain reactions in me, which end up making the child kind of even worse. Yeah, and you can have insufficient synchrony where I just can't match my state to yours. I can't empathize. I'm too flat, and that means that you don't calm down as well as you want. Okay, and then just the last idea that I wanted to talk about is there's kind of two ways of thinking about synchrony. Yeah, this is right at the heart of Colwyn Trevarthen's work, all ideas of intersubjectivity. Yeah, and one is this idea of shown by these two pendulums swinging. Yeah, we create rhythms and we both tune into the same rhythms, and it's through that we get life there. Yeah, and this is true. Yeah, all the stuff I was saying about daily routines, about call and response, about songs and music is important. Yeah, but there's another way we can create synchrony, and this is just meant to be a ball kind of bouncing around. Yeah, and basically the red ball is following the blue ball, and then the blue ball is following the red ball. Yeah, and this is this idea that I'm always matching the state that I'm in to the state that you're in at a particular time. Yeah, and that also drives synchrony. It also helps us to be in the same state at the same time. Yeah, but this is very different. This is irregular. This is about skipping a beat to stay in the same place as the child. Okay. So we've been talking about how these different forms of synchrony, yeah. One, we create a rhythm for us both to tune into, yeah. And secondly, I'm always changing what I'm doing depending on where you are, yeah. How they can both help us to be in the same state at the same time, yeah. And we've been talking about some of the mechanisms through which this is important for helping us to achieve stable states of arousal and transitioning between the states of arousal that we need to be in when we need to do it. Okay. So next week, I'm going to be talking about how the same principles apply to attention as a shared state, about how attention is relational, how learning is relational, how it doesn't just happen in our brains. But for now, thank you very much.